Why did Lyra have that kind of dream? What exactly is the past between her and Marius? Do you want to know the mystery of Lyra's dream? Subscribe now to find out. 21. Lyra. I was sure they would stay busy with the mess I created for them. It'd be enough to distract them, and I was satisfied. Now all that was left for me to do was pack my shit and leave this place for good. But I was feeling tired. And was pretty much drunk too. The things weren't a good combination for me. Without realizing it, I fell asleep on the chair. I slept for a while and dreamt. It had been a long time since I had seen any dreams, but when I closed my eyes, the dreams started floating in front of me as if they had been waiting for me to fall asleep. It was as if they had been conspiring it. I walked down a known dirt road through the woods until I saw the ruins of the ancient temple. It was where I had summoned the moon goddess. I felt a sense of urgency as I treaded through the path and ventured further into the ruins, seeking the twin pillars. The sun was setting on the horizon, and it was gradually getting dark. Not the best time I choose to visit this place, but I was here regardless. I felt like someone was waiting for me there, and I needed to meet them. I noticed a familiar figure waiting for me when the twin pillars appeared. I couldn't determine who it was, but I was sure I knew them. I headed in their direction, unsure what to expect. But the closer I got to them, the more excited my wolf got. I realized who it was when I was close enough to them, but it was already too late. Before I could leave, he turned around and faced me. Lyra, he called out for me, and instantly I froze, unable to move anymore. It was Marius. I missed you so much. His voice was laced with pain as he closed the distance between us. I wanted to step back, but I couldn't. I was too captivated by him and his overbearing presence. My wolf liked him a lot. Marius, I wanted to sound snappish. I tried to push him away, but my voice came out like a moan. Instantly, he moved closer and wrapped his arms around me until my body was pressed against his. Whatever resistance I had against him left my body due to his touch and his warmth. My whole body lit up with the need to be with him. I wanted to run away from him, but I felt myself giving in to his touch. I wanted to get closer to him. No, I needed to get closer to him, otherwise it felt like I'd get lost somewhere. He was my anchor to the world, and I didn't want to leave him. Not again. His hands wandered all over me as he pressed his body against mine, making me feel every hard edge of his muscle and his throbbing erection. I could feel his knot too digging into my stomach. Why did you leave, Lyra? He asked, more hurt dripping from his voice. His glowing eyes were watching me hungrily. But there was something melancholic about his eyes that I couldn't let go. It softened me for him. I felt guilty for leaving even though I knew I shouldn't. At that moment I couldn't help feeling all those emotions. I'm sorry, I sobbed lightly, blinking tears while also feeling an intense craving for him. Fuck, I had never experienced something like that before. It was too powerful to ignore. A slow throbbing was rising between my legs, demanding to be addressed. I missed you, he told me again, his lips lingering closer to mine. I missed you so much that it hurts. I'm sorry, I whimpered, feeling the ache between my legs worsening. It was as if I was being punished for the crime of leaving him. I groaned. I promise I'll never do that again, I whimpered. He growled in approval before claiming my lips. Immediately it felt like I was bursting into flames. A storm of sparks took over my senses, numbing me to everything around me except for him. All I could feel was him, his lips, his hot and greedy mouth, his steely muscles around me, his erection, his scent. He took over everything, and it was slowly overwhelming me. He kissed me fiercely, claiming what was rightfully his. His tongue dominated mine before petting it, teasing it, and doing numerous mind-blowing things to it. Felt like I was melting against him. The ache between my legs only got worse with every passing second. It felt like I was going into heat. I clung to his kiss because it oddly seemed to help me. I let him suck hard at my lips, torturing me deliciously. It made me want his cock inside me badly. He made my pussy feel desperately empty. I was definitely going into heat. Marius, I need you, I moaned, begging. I needed him. Otherwise it felt like I was going to die. Well, I could die if he didn't help me out. Going into heat without any help was dangerous. Lyra, he moaned, my baby girl. I'll give you everything. All you have to do is ask, he promised. One of his hands grabbed my ass and squeezed it, making me squirm with need. I need your knot, Marius, I demanded. Please, You're in heat, baby girl, he said, kissing me again. Baby girl. Heat. 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 I woke up with a cold seat, almost falling out of the chair. I didn't realize I fell asleep. I get out of place as if I had been knocked out of my body. My head was aching and my body seemed to be heating up. I had never felt so hot and needy before. As soon as I recalled the dream, my pussy clenched hard, reminding me what I was missing, what I could have had if I had been with him instead of running away last night. I reached into my pants and gently stroked myself, feeling frustrated instantly because it wasn't enough. No fingers or dildos or vibrators could replace a mate's cock with a knot. I moaned, feeling hotter as I stroked myself. My breasts felt sensitive as well. I pulled down my bra and pinched one of my nipples while I aggressively rubbed my clit, chasing for a quick release. I was on the verge of coming when my phone rang up suddenly. I sat up, shocked and feeling disoriented. It didn't help that I was still somewhat drunk and frustrated by a lost orgasm. It must have been the alarm. I was going to ignore it, but then realized that someone was calling me instead. This frustrated me even more. I took the phone and without seeing the number, I answered the call. Hello, I spoke, ready to give the caller a piece of my mind for disturbing me. Hi, Lyra. An unknown voice answered, making my wolf stir again. I didn't know what was about that voice, but it made my pussy clench hard, forcing me to have the denied orgasm. 22. Lyra. Hi, Lyra. An unknown voice answered, making my wolf stir again. I didn't know what was about that voice, but it made my pussy clench hard, forcing me to have the denied orgasm. I swallowed the moan, threatening to escape my lips while my whole body shook with the orgasm, making me forget about everything. It took me a couple of seconds to return to the present and remember that someone on the phone was waiting for my response. Hello. I croaked, not liking how I sounded out of breath. Who is this? It took me an effort to ask that. In response, I heard the most melodious chuckle that kindled the throbbing between my legs. It was the sexiest voice I had ever heard. I didn't know why, but I was somehow fascinated with the voice. That's not important, he replied, and I frowned. I wanted to know who that voice belonged to and why it was making me feel this way. But last night you left something at the hotel. I sucked in a breath, already imagining who could be on the other side of the line. Oh, did I? I asked, opening my laptop and checking the ID of the caller. Caspian King. Great. But how did he get my number? And most importantly, how did he call me on this number? I usually had the blockers active to divert unwanted calls and ensure that no one could track my location through the number. Yes, and I was wondering if you could come back to fetch it, he offered, or it could be delivered to your address. Immediately, I knew what it was all about, but the laugh died in my throat when I checked my blockers. They weren't active. Fuck. That meant my number wasn't protected and could be tracked to this location. Fuck. How did I fuck up so fucking bad? Usually, I always ensured that the littlest details like these were taken care of, but how did I forget about this? No thanks. I don't need it, I tried to dismiss. I was a mess, unsure what to do. I was caught unprepared in that situation, and the sexual haze from that intense orgasm slowed down my brain to a great extent. Are you sure, Lyra? Caspian King asked, something dark and suggestive in his voice. It's important. Look, I don't want to do anything with him. I shot, triggered. I wouldn't say I liked his teasing voice and all the things it was doing to me. I tried to think of something, but my mind was a mess. The throbbing between my legs wasn't helping me at all. It was torturous. We could discuss that properly if I said I'm not interested in your brother, I hissed. A tense silence followed on the other side of the line, making me anxious. I put on the blockers to conceal my location, but something told me it was already too late. How did you know I'm Marius's brother? He asked me after that tense pause. I wanted to disconnect the call and already be done with it. At the back of my head, the clock had started ticking. It was only a matter of time for them to find my location. I was in a race against time and needed to act fast. Getting caught wasn't an option. If I got caught, it wouldn't end well. Despite knowing this, I still couldn't disconnect the call. I wanted to hear Caspian talk and see what he had to offer. I liked his voice. A bit too much for my liking. It doesn't take a genius, I snapped. I don't want to do anything with your brother. I hate him. He ruined my date with Fidel. He's sorry for that, and he wants to meet you to make it up to you, Caspian assured me. But I knew what this was all about. I don't care, I snapped. annoyed with every passing second. Suddenly, my wolf had started pacing inside me again, interested in the conversation. This added to my frustration. She had mourned all night, and now she wanted to meet him. I'd never allow that, no matter what. Look, I know my brother isn't all sunshine and roses. He's domineering, but I assure you, he'll be nice once you give him a chance. Caspian sounded sincere with that, and it almost made me want to say yes. No, it was my wolf who wanted to say yes, but I pushed her back, and rightfully so. I wouldn't let her out anytime soon, no matter what. Still not interested. I hate him, I answered, checking other security measures on my laptop. I was still bummed on how I had made such a small yet dangerous mistake. Could completely ruin all my years of work. You just met him last night. What made you hate him? I'm sure it just wasn't a ruined date, he pondered out loud. I had to give it to Caspian, he was observant. And it pleased me deeply for some reason. What the fuck was wrong with me? You're right. It's just more than a ruined date, I gritted, trying to swallow down the dark memories that started to appear out of nowhere. These two brothers triggered me in every way possible. Then what is it about? Caspian asked, his voice cautious. Oh, it's more than that, I muttered, clutching the phone and glaring at the screen before me. It's old and personal. I was so lost in my destructive thoughts that it took me a couple of minutes to realize that the call had disconnected and Caspian wasn't on the other side anymore. I gritted my teeth, feeling the destructive rage take over me. I wanted to destroy Marius. I wanted to see the brothers suffer. Whatever I did didn't feel enough. There needed to be more damage. Irreversible damage. 23. Caspian, you just met him last night. What made you hate him? I'm sure it just wasn't a ruined date, I stated, unable to find a strong enough reason to justify her leaving my brother last night. There must have been more to it than she was letting me know. You're right. It's just more than a ruined date, she muttered. Her voice was low and whispery. I didn't know why, but a part of me liked it. I even found it strangely fascinating. I wanted to hear her talk more. I wanted to know more. It was a miracle that she had picked up my call and was talking to me in the first place. I was hoping I could talk her into coming back and meeting my brother again. Marius would appreciate that, and beyond that, I was strangely curious while talking to her. I wanted to meet her too. Then what is it about? I asked, hoping there could be some way I could convince her to come back. Oh, it's more than that, she muttered, her voice taking a darker inflection. It's old and personal, she added. I didn't miss the hint of vengeance in her voice. Oddly, it made my wolf stir. It bewildered me, but I had a feeling that she was up to no good. This wasn't solid evidence yet, but it pointed out more to my theory that she had something to do with Morgan. I had to figure that out. I was about to ask her more, but the call disconnected. I tried calling her back, but the call wouldn't go through. The more I looked into this case, the more fishier things seemed. I was starting to have some hope that maybe we'd figure something out. Just in time, I noticed another email from the cyber team. They seemed to have done some digging on the phone number. The first thing I noticed when I opened the email was the location. I was surprised to find that because I hadn't been expecting that. I was sure she was using some blocker that didn't let my call go through the second time, but somehow the cyber team had managed to get the location of the call. I acted immediately, getting up and going straight to Marius. He was busy talking to one of our solicitors about the frozen offshore bank account, but he was ready to go with me as soon as I told him about the location. I didn't waste any time. I called Rory and informed Fidel before setting out to the location. It happened to be somewhere near the port, a private property in the woods. I drove nonetheless, not caring about the speed limit. We needed to get there as soon as possible, and until we reached our destination, I counted down the seconds. The restlessness was back while I was driving, and it was worse than ever. It made me wonder if this meant I would also meet my mate. I'd be over the moon, but for the time being, I focused on getting to the location as soon as possible. We reached the port within 20 minutes. The sea was a dark blue here, and the city was quieter. It was mostly a peaceful residential area, away from the packs and among the humans. The woods were sparse here but still good enough to hide if needed. I kept driving, the houses on our left and the sea on our right. The woods got thicker as we headed further north, but the road continued. Finally, we reached a place close enough to the location. What's the plan? I asked, staring at the woods. I could see a house in there. It looked slightly abandoned, but we would check it out nonetheless. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned. Marius was tense beside me while Rory was arming up in the back seat. I closed my eyes and tried to calm down my wolf, but he was more active than he had ever been in my entire life. This made me hopeful. Maybe I too was going to meet my mate soon. The thought excited me further, making my wolf more energetic. He wanted to take over me and go out in the woods with his nose on the ground, searching for our mate. I tried to focus on the present. Rory, check the parameters. Caspian, take cover, and I'll walk in through the front door, Marius ordered. I chuckled, feeling like I could take over the world. Seeing my brother back made me feel more positive about this. We were going to find Lyra soon. And maybe my mate too. Like old times, I grinned and exited the car before taking a pistol. I didn't think it'd be needed, but still. Better safe than sorry. With that, I slipped into the woods. I found a tree that was tall enough to climb and search the area, and also provided me with a good view of the house. It was old but big nonetheless. From outside, I didn't see any signs of a resident, but the absence of the overgrowth in the driveway told me that it was a regularly maintained place. I was alert as I watched Marius walk down the house and knock on it. He waited, but there was no response. He knocked again. No response. He looked around, but there was nothing. He knocked the third time. This time the response came, but in the form of an explosion. 24. Lyra. As soon as the call disconnected, I knew I had to start moving, or else it'd be too late. It was already too late. I didn't have a good feeling about it. I had to pack my stuff and get rid of all the hardware I couldn't take with me. I couldn't risk it falling into their hands. That'd be a major disaster. I already had systems in place to deal with such kind of situations. I permanently stored the important hardware in the basement where I had the explosives installed. It was easier that way, but my brain felt like scrambled eggs today. Especially after that feverish dream about Marius and the phone call with Caspian. It was all I could think about, and my wolf's longing wasn't helping me in this situation at all. Felt like I was at war with myself. Me and my wolf wanted different things. This was the first time when I was in a conflict like this. It rarely happened before, but those brothers had done this to me. Especially Marius. Marius. My wolf howled inside me, calling for him. She wanted to be with him so bad that it hurt. I tried to remind her of what he had done in the past, but that didn't matter to her much. She had craved a mate for so long that she would accept someone like Marius. It made me feel pathetic, intensifying my disdain for Marius. I suppressed her emotions and focused on the present. I needed to leave soon because I had a feeling they'd come looking for me here one way or the other. Especially after the phone call. They must have found some way to track my location. I opened my wardrobe and hastily stuffed my clothes in a duffel bag. I wasn't going to carry much. If they somehow managed to find me, the last thing I wanted was to be caught with something that'd give them an edge over me. The only things I took were the clothes, cash, and my ID. After that, I started taking the rest of my hardware in the basement. All my data was stored on a server in another location, so I didn't have to worry about losing everything. I always ensured there was backup. After moving everything into the basement, I started working on the explosives. I had them installed by an expert once. However, this was the first time I was going to try them. I checked everything before turning on the timer. My heart throbbed painfully as I watched the countdown start on the screen. I took a last glance at my stuff. It was such a shame I had to get rid of all my things, but it was for the best. I could hear the time ticking away as I locked the basement door and raced upstairs. I had 10 minutes to leave the building and reach a safe location. I grabbed my bag and checked everything once before leaving the place I called home for the past few years. It wasn't much, just a rundown 2-story house that I had gotten from an old couple. I walked out of the woods and was about to leave when I heard a car in the distance. I froze. It was a one-way street. My house was at the end of it. Up ahead, the road continued for a kilometer before abruptly ending on a cliff. It didn't take me more than a second to guess who could be coming this way. I turned around and ran into the woods seeking cover. I hid at a distance from the house, but it wasn't safe from the explosion. However, the ticking bomb left my mind when I thought about the brothers, especially Marius. He had finally managed to find me. My wolf was happy about it. She wanted to be hunted down and mated like they used to do in the old days. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at her. Thinking logically wasn't her forte. Her only focus was on Marius and being found and mounted by him. I focused on the situation before she could drag me into her steamy thoughts filled with Marius and all the delicious things he could do to me. I couldn't see much from where I was hiding, but I heard the car stopping on the road, followed by footsteps 3. Soon a man came into view. I didn't know his name, but I knew he worked for the brothers. He rounded the house searching. In the distance, the birds started chirping loudly, trying to warn the woods against the wolves. I swallowed hard. I didn't have to see to know that they were here, the brothers. The Alpha brothers. I glanced at my wristwatch and frowned. It had been more than 10 minutes, yet the explosion hadn't happened. This wasn't a good thing, especially since they were here. If the bomb didn't go off at all, then I'd be in big trouble, but at the same time I couldn't go there and check because they were already there and the bomb. Maybe it was delayed somehow. I was mentally cursing myself as I held my breath and waited. I caught a glance of Marius heading towards my front door. My heart fluttered just by looking at him, but I forced all the emotions away. I needed to focus. He knocked on the front door and waited. My wolf was anxiously pacing inside me. Marius was in danger. If the bomb went off, he'd get severe burns. My wolf didn't like this. She was mad at me for placing him in danger, and to some extent it made me feel guilty and more anxious. I couldn't help but move closer to the house to see what happened. The basement was at the back of the house, so the explosion's maximum impact would come from the back. There was a back door to it, and I was contemplating slipping there and checking on the bomb. I knew it would be dangerous, but I had nothing to lose. I should have thought through this. This was the first time I had to carry out an important task like this, and there were too many variables I hadn't prepared for. This was very unlike me. Today, I was entirely out of my element and made one mistake after another. All this because my wolf was fighting against me. I clenched my jaw and tried to swallow my anger. I needed to focus and stop this situation from getting messy. I was close enough to the house when I heard Marius knock again. The next thing that I saw was a flash of blinding light, before I was thrown back violently against a tree. I hit my head hard against it, and the last thing I remembered was a skull-cracking pain before my world went pitch black. 25. Caspian, the explosion knocked me off the tree and I landed on my back. Hot pain burned through my back at the impact, but I uprighted myself immediately, glancing around. Black dots clouded my vision, and the explosion shook all my senses. It took me a few seconds to fully configure myself and become aware of my surroundings. The back end of the house was on fire, and so were some of the trees surrounding that part. A thick cloud of smoke covered everything, making me cough. My eyes stung from the smoke as I searched the place for Matt. When the smoke slightly lifted off, I could finally spot my brother crouched at a distance from the house. His clothes were tattered and his skin was burned. I rushed to his side, grabbing his arm and trying to get him upright, but he grunted in pain. "Are you all right?" I asked, checking the burns on his skin. They are mostly minor burns, but he had a deep cut on his forehead that was bleeding profusely. "Yeah," he groaned. "What the fuck happened?" he asked. I tore my shirt to tie the wound on his head and stop the bleeding. "The back part of the house blew up," I answered, tying his wound. I was still in shock from the blast and my ears rang. I could tell that Matt was deeply shocked by the explosion, and it'd take him longer to be upright again. "Where's Rory?" he asked. I supported him by draping his arm over my shoulder and putting my free arm around his mid. I needed to take him to the car as soon as possible. "I haven't seen him," I replied, dragging him to the road. Behind us, the house continued to burn. There was a lot of black smoke coming out of the house for some reason, and it didn't sit right with me. It made me want to get out of there as soon as possible. This all could have been a trap set up by Morgan, and we fell for it this time. Again, I couldn't help but wonder if Lyra had something to do with this whole thing. Was Lyra the bait for this trap? If so, then it'd be a huge mess to deal with. But I could deal with that later. I needed to get Matt out of there and get him looked at. The way he was bleeding made me anxious. He was lucky that only the back part of the house exploded. He'd have been burnt to a crisp had it been the front portion. From his injuries, I guessed that the explosion threw him back with a crushing force, and he must have hit his head hard against a tree. Otherwise, I didn't see any severe burns on his body. After helping Matt get inside the car, I turned back to the woods to find Rory and bring him back. I hoped Rory would be alive when he appeared out of a smoke wall, coughing violently. "Rory," I gasped. almost hugging him out of relief before checking his wounds. He was not hurt at all. We need to get out of here as soon as possible. This was a trap set up by Morgan, I told him while he coughed. You need to come with me, Rory managed to say between the coughs, tugging me toward the burning house. Puzzled me. A pitch-black cloud of smoke rose from the house, darkening the sky instantly. It made me wonder what exactly was in the house that was prodding so much smoke. What is it? I asked Rory, blinking tears. Whatever was in the air, it was stinging our eyes. You need to come and see it. I'm not sure if she's alive, Rory managed to respond before heading back toward the house. I followed him, deeply puzzled but fully alert this time. He rounded the house and kept walking deeper into the woods. Here the smoke was denser and made my eyes burn like lava. I couldn't see much beyond a few meters ahead of me. I wanted to drag Rory out of there, but I wondered who he had found. Oddly, my wolf chose this time to start pacing inside me, anticipating something big. I frowned to myself, feeling more disconnected. Now was not the time when I wanted to get distracted in any way. Matt was hurt, and I needed to treat him immediately. And Rory tried to show me something important. My wolf shouldn't have any reason to act so strangely, yet he did, and it almost got on my nerves. However, the reason for his strange behavior was soon revealed when the smoke started to thin slightly, and I noticed a body up ahead. My wolf stirred again, but this time he was anxious. My feet moved fast until I left Rory behind and almost ran towards the body. The closer I got to it, the more my wolf was pacing inside me, fighting me to take control. He wanted to be on the surface, dealing with the situation. I tried to ignore him, but as soon as I reached the body, my world came crashing down on me. I was on my knees instantly, pulling her in my arms. My wolf howled inside me as I looked at a familiar face smeared with black dust from the explosion. Lyra, I growled, my wolf taking over me forcefully. Only one word was running through my mind as I stared at her face in disbelief and wonder. Mate. 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 Lyra was my mate. For a split second, I felt like I had everything in the world. But the grande feeling was gone as soon as her head fell back lifelessly. 26. Marius, I woke up to a splitting pain in my head, wondering how the fuck I got that. My vision was blurry no matter how hard I tried to focus. I tried to recall how I got that pain, but I couldn't come up with anything. The more I tried to force myself to remember, the more my head hurt. My wolf should have been busy mending it, but he was silent. Awfully silent. It was unsettling to an extent. Marius, a voice spoke beside me, are you alright? I didn't miss the cautiousness in the question. It took me a few seconds to realize it was Fidel. My head is splitting, I growled. How did it happen? I asked. Talking seemed to make the pain worse, but I'd rather have the answers than suffer silently. You were caught in an explosion while tracking a location, he explained. I have some meds if your pain is worse, he offered, but something in his words didn't feel right. I never need to take meds, I gritted. Why isn't my wolf healing me? I demanded, and he went reticent. By now, my vision had started to clear significantly, and I could see that we were back in our pack and I was presently in our pack hospital. Well, the injury was intense. You lost a lot of blood too, he explained, but I could tell he wasn't speaking the whole truth. Fidel was one of my most trusted men, and he had worked with me for a long time, but ever since Lyra, there had been a divide between us. Lyra. I last remembered going to a location with Caspian and Rory. After that, everything in my memory was blank. The location was where Lyra had called from, and I remembered being overly optimistic about finding her there. Did we find Lyra? I asked as soon as I started remembering everything. Yes, he answered cautiously. Where's she? I demanded, sitting up, and instantly the pain intensified in my head, but that didn't matter. I need to see her, Matt, calm down. It would be best if you rested, Fidel said, trying to fuss over me, but I set him straight with a glare. Where is Lyra? I growled. What happened to her? Are you still trying to get back with her? I demanded. So many questions floated in my head, and I felt overwhelmed by all of them. I needed the answer to everything all at once, otherwise it felt like I would lose my mind. I needed to see Lyra, talk to her, and tell her how much she meant to me and how I'd forever cherish her no matter what. I'd beg her to be with me if that's what she'd ask of me. I was ready to do anything for her. Any fucking thing. Fidel looked more uncomfortable at my questions, making me want to rip his face off. The image of Lyra laughing with him that night flashed before my eyes, making my heart burn with jealousy. I was willing to get rid of him if it meant I'd get to keep Lyra to myself. Well, it's a long story, and no, I'm not dating her. I never had anything going on with her. I had asked her to show me around since she seemed to be a local. That's all. Everything she told you other than that was a lie. I'd never dare to take your mate, Alpha. I know my place, Fidel told me sincerely while I stared at him grimly. Even though I was still pissed at him for finding Lyra first, I forgave him. It wasn't his fault that he'd found Lyra first. If anything, he had done me a favor by inviting Lyra to the party that night. Otherwise, I'd have never met her. My wolf is possessive, I told him, and he nodded in understanding. Serving you is the most honorable thing to me, Alpha. I'd never disrespect you or cheat you in any way. I respect Lyra as our future Luna. And I'm looking forward to serving her, he stated firmly, his voice grim and professional. I nodded, feeling satisfied with that. But where's she? I pressed, and immediately, the grim expression on his face faltered. He looked unsure, not looking me directly in the eye. She's sleeping, he answered curtly. She's here. I asked, surprised and optimistic. He nodded reluctantly before standing up. I'll go inform Caspian that you're awake. He can explain better, Fidel muttered, leaving the room abruptly before I could ask him more questions. This added to the existing uneasy feeling inside me. After a couple of seconds, Caspian entered the room. The first thing I noticed was how tired he looked. He seemed to have aged 20 years since I was last awake. His eyes lit up gently when he saw me. Matt, you're awake, he spoke in relief. Of course I am. How long I had been out? I asked while he sat beside me. 3 days, he answered. What? I don't. You hurt your head severely, brother. You were the second closest to the explosion, he told me, a dark look on his face. And who was the closest? I had to ask, especially after seeing the look on his face. Before he could answer, I knew what it was going to be. Lyra, he answered, defeat in his voice. My heart stopped and I stared at him in distress. There was a strange look on his face as he stared at me. I need to see her, I demanded, trying to get out of bed, but he pushed me back. She's unconscious, Caspian gritted. And you need to rest too. I cannot rest until I see her. I cannot even feel my wolf, Caspian. I roared, simmering with frustration and angst. It felt like I wouldn't be at peace until I saw her myself. It's not only you, Matt. My wolf has been quiet too. She growled back, his eyes red with angry tears. He looked on the verge of breaking, making me stop for a second. He must have been taking care of everything ever since the explosion. I shouldn't have been so hard on him, but I couldn't help myself. The urge to see my mate eroded my rationality. What do you mean by that? I demanded. We have the same mate, Matt, Caspian replied. Lyra is my mate too, 27. Caspian. I was shocked to find out that Lyra was my mate. Not that having two mates was uncommon. There were 2 great-granddads on my mother's side of the family, but still I was shocked and terrified. The first time I saw her and held her in my arms, she was almost lifeless. I thought she was dead, and that had pushed me towards insanity. I hadn't slept or had a moment of peace since the explosion. Lyra was almost dead. And my brother had a severe wound that refused to heal. Those 3 days had been the most testing days of my life. I didn't have Matt, and I thought my mate was dead. After my revelation, Matt stared at me for a long minute, searching my face. Usually, alphas were said to be very possessive over their mates, but oddly, the idea of sharing Lyra with my brother didn't make me feel jealous. Instead, it thrilled me in an unexplainable way. I couldn't have ever imagined this in my wildest of dreams. Are you sure? He asked. I didn't see any hint of jealousy in him either. He wasn't reacting the way he responded to finding out that Fidel was dating Lyra. Yes, I answered, and he nodded in understanding but didn't say anything. I need to see her, he demanded, getting up from the bed. I could see it pained him to do so, but the determination in his eyes was fierce. He wasn't going to listen to me until he'd seen her. She's unconscious, I told him, supporting him to stand upright. He winced in pain but didn't complain, his will unfaltering. I need to see her, Caspian, he growled. I want to know what happened. I want to know why my wolf is quiet and why I cannot feel any part of the mate bond. He demanded. I had the answers to his questions, but my heart was too heavy to tell him. I know you know what's going on. She got hurt pretty bad in the explosion, I sighed, knowing that I wouldn't be able to keep it from him for long. He would find out either way, and I could understand his urge to learn more about our mate. But I didn't want him to hurt the way I did when I saw her broken, burnt body. I had almost lost my mind and my wolf at that moment. The image of her almost dead face was permanently etched in my brain, and I was never going to forget it. How bad? Matt grilled, pushing off my support and walking by himself despite being weak and recovering. Answer me, he growled when I remained quiet. She had a major crack in the cranium and a part of her brain is swollen and I trailed off, unable to continue. Every time I saw her broken body, it pained my soul. And Matt demanded. She suffered from severe burns on her left side, especially her left hand. The doctor says it could be permanently damaged and might need amputation. She inhaled a lot of smoke too. I finally let it out. My words made Matt walk faster towards the intensive care unit. It was where I had spent the last couple of days. I had been going back and forth between Matt and Lyra. It was torture for me, especially the thought of losing them together. Even in his weak state, Matt practically peeled the door off of the intensive care unit before storming inside, not listening to the nurse. He stopped only when he was beside Lyra. I didn't miss how his face blanched when he looked at her broken body. I tried not to look at her again, but my eyes betrayed me. Every time I looked at her, I felt a stabbing pain in my chest. Maybe we could have saved her if we had arrived early to the location. This was making me regret not getting there earlier. I could have stopped this from happening, and she'd have been healthy and happy with us. I could have prevented a lot of things, but I was late. This was one of the things that had been eating me away since that day. But at the same time I wondered who did it. After the fire had died, I had sent my men to look at the ruins and try to find any hints, especially why the place had blown up and why there was so much black smoke. I learned there was a second explosion soon after I fled the place with them. The only thing my men found was ash and melted metal. The second explosion was more destructive and destroyed whatever was left after the first explosion. One thing was confirmed from all this: the explosions weren't an accident. They were coordinated and somehow Lyra got caught in it. I was sure Morgan did it, which made me want to hunt her down even more. She hurt my mate. She almost took my mate away from me. She was the reason Lyra was in such a broken condition. I didn't want to stare at her damaged hand, but I couldn't. It was severely bandaged, but the doctor had said she might not be able to use her left hand. It made me see red. I was now more determined to hunt Morgan down and do all the damage she caused to my mate. But for now I wanted Lyra to wake up. I wanted her to look at me and recognize me as her mate. I wanted her to hear her seductive and mischievous voice. My whole body had been yearning for her voice. It pained me physically not to have any of those things. I clenched my jaw painfully, swallowing away the wave of emotions while I watched Matt gently touch Lyra's face. There were some minor burns on her cheek, but one side of her face and head was swollen, and that seemed to get worse every day. Lyra, Matt whispered, holding her good hand and kissing it. I stood by his side watching our mate. Please, wake up, Matt's voice broke and a tear ran down my cheek. I was too focused on Matt and our mate to notice when the doctor entered the room. Alpha Matt. Alpha Caspian, the doctor greeted the two of us. When will she wake up? Matt demanded, sounding out of control. This worsened the storm of emotions inside me. It had been a wonder how I had been holding myself for the past couple of days. I cannot answer that yet, Alpha Matt, the doctor responded hesitantly, but I'm afraid we might have to proceed with the amputation. The damaged hand is making it worse for her. With that, my heart shattered. 28. Lyra. When I woke up, it felt like I had been run over by a freight train. My whole body ached, and the mere act of blinking seemed to debilitate me. I felt exhausted, yet I couldn't go back to sleep. Something in me wouldn't allow that, and also the lights. The fucking lights that were so intense and focused on me. I had to blink several times to focus my vision, but having the lights on gave me an immediate headache. I groaned, wanting to leave my body until the pain eased away. I didn't know if it was possible, but if there were an option to do such a thing, I'd have utilized it. It was too painful to dwell in my own body. Fuck the light, I tried to speak, but my tongue felt like parchment paper against my mouth, sending me into a coughing fit. My lips burned due to being chapped, and suddenly it felt like I was stuck in the desert. I felt some commotion nearby, but the coughing overwhelmed me, draining whatever energy I had mustered. My eyes fluttered, my eyelids feeling heavy as exhaustion took over me. Finally, someone turned off the lights on my face, but the commotion continued. I felt someone fiddling with one of my hands. From the corner of my eyes, I saw someone familiar appear, leaning over to look at me. Due to my blurry vision, I couldn't tell who it was, but they had my wolf's attention. She was waking up from a slumber too. I could imagine her yawning and stretching in my head, but she didn't seem to be in the same terrible condition as me. However, sensing my pain, she got to work immediately, healing me. Water, I whispered, trying to lick my chapped lips, but I tasted blood instead. My lips were bleeding from being chapped. Lyra, what are you saying? A voice asked, the face getting closer to mine, but still I couldn't focus my vision. Water, I coughed, forcing the words out. Finally, someone seemed to understand me, but I didn't get the water immediately. Instead, I felt the bed moving underneath me until I was somewhat upright. I sighed when finally someone held a cup against my lips, slowly pouring the water. I instantly felt so relieved that I could have kissed the person giving me water. It made me feel alive again. Not more than that. She might choke. An alarmed voice cautioned on my other side, and the water supply stopped instantly. I wanted to curse out at that person but lacked the energy to speak. Lyra, that voice called out to me again, and for some reason I could hear the voice clearer this time. My vision started to focus as well. I blinked a couple more seconds before my vision focused on a face, a familiar one but not the one I wanted to see at that moment. It was Marius King, the man I hated the most. But why was he looking at me wide-eyed? Like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And where the fuck was I? Why did my mouth feel like someone had poured sand into it? Why did my lips hurt? Why did my whole body hurt? What that fuck was going on? I tried to recall but nothing came to my head. It didn't help that Marius looked at me like I was a miracle. It took me a few seconds to notice the deep slash on his head and the dark circles under his eyes. His cheeks looked hollowed too. Overall, he looked worse. It seemed like he had been out in the wild, lost and struggling to survive. This filled my head with even more questions. Do you recognize me? He asked, searching my face desperately. I scowled at him. Or tried to. He waited for my response. Yes, I answered, and I still hate you. Something flickered in his eyes before he nodded. However, my wolf felt differently about seeing him. She was rather excited at seeing him, wanting to leap at him and beg him to take us. Her behavior surprised me sometimes. She started acting like a pup out of nowhere. She's awake, he informed someone outside my line of vision. Where am I and how did I get here? I asked. Before he could answer, another face appeared in my semi-blurry vision. Familiar one, but it was the first time I was seeing him in person. I had talked to him before, but seeing him in person was different. Caspian King. He looked somewhat messy as well, but that didn't matter. My wolf was happy to see him too. A bit too optimistic. As delighted as she was to see Marius. For some reason, my heart started beating fast as I looked at Caspian. In the background, I heard a beeping sound grow annoyingly rapid, causing more commotion. I didn't know what was happening to my body. I looked at Marius and then at Caspian and then back at Marius, waiting for someone to tell me that it was a dream. I must be dreaming because there was no fucking way I had two mates. The King brothers. The brothers I was determined to destroy. My wolf was over the moon to be paired with them. She couldn't have been happier but me. I was terrified, angry, sad, disappointed and a lot many other things. Happy wasn't one of them. What did I do to deserve this? Lyra, Caspian whispered, touching my face. Sparks immediately lit up, dancing all over my skin before traveling down my body. Our Lyra, he spoke, but his words burned my skin. No, I whispered, but it was lost between my struggling breaths. It felt like my lungs weren't working, but at the same time my heart was thrumming inside my chest like a drill. Before I could say anything more, my eyes fluttered shut, and I was sleeping again. 29. Lyra. I didn't know how much time had passed since I woke up and found out I had two mates, but it felt like days. It was more than a couple of days. I'd wake up for a few minutes daily to find one of the brothers by my side before going back to sleep. And I'd dream about the brothers again, about them doing sinful things to me. I didn't want to imagine such things, but my wolf craved the two like I craved water. Yet they wouldn't give it to me. I was awake longer than before each time I woke up and felt less tired, but my body was still weak. I couldn't feel the left side of my body for some reason, but one day I figured out why. It felt like a terrible dream when I found a cybernetic arm in place of my human left arm. Caspian informed me that I had burnt my left arm in the explosion, and they had to replace it. He had been the one to tell me all about it. I'd only talk to him and ignore or pretend to sleep whenever Marius was around. Even though I despised the two equally, it was easier to talk to Caspian. He was the less serious one of the two brothers and had a unique sense of humor that was hard to dislike. Conversely, Marius carried a domineering air that sometimes overwhelmed me because he commanded all my attention. There was a focused intensity to his presence that made me feel entrapped in his essence. His burning gaze always seemed to hold me captive in them with a suffocating intensity. I wasn't strong enough to withstand that yet. However, my wolf didn't discriminate between the two brothers. She'd jump either of them or even both if she could, so I can take it off any time. I asked Caspian one day. Even though I pretended not to care outwardly, waking up to a robotic arm was something eerie. It was all I could think of. I had lost my arm because of my foolishness. No, Caspian explained, looking at me with soft eyes, it's permanently attached to your bone. It's like a real arm. But it's not, I muttered, and something darkened in his eyes, making me regret saying that in the first place. But he didn't say anything about it. I could tell that the brothers were trying their best to keep me alive, and I should be grateful to them, but I couldn't. I didn't want to even if I could. However, my wolf was deeply pleased, making her yearning for the two stronger day by day. I'm sorry, he returned. It'll never be your real arm, but it's close enough to that. Even better in some ways, he explained. How? There's a chip placed in your brain that's connected to a what? I asked. A chip in your brain, he clarified. We needed to work on your head too since it cracked open in the explosion, but it's better now. You're healing a light. The chip in your brain connects to your arm and synchronizes it with the rest of your body, making your reflexes sharper. They say you'll get used to it soon. I licked my lips, trying to take in all the information. I glanced at my arm and tried to lift it, but accidentally smacked Caspian in the face. But he caught my new arm on time and let it down. You'd need a good amount of calibration first, he commented. But that's good enough, he nodded to himself, checking my fingers. My wolf stirred inside me, wanting to hold his hand, wanting to touch him and get closer to him. But I suppressed it all. It was one of the topics I ignored while talking to him. He studied me profoundly as if I was the most important thing to exist on this planet. I could almost feel his longing and suffering through the mate bond, but I chose not to address it. I pretended I didn't feel it, but it was there and often troubled me in my dreams. How long have I been in the hospital? I asked him. A month and a half, he answered, and I let out a small yelp. We weren't expecting you to wake up soon, he told me. But I'm glad you're awake, Lyra. I tried to ignore how my name on his lips made me feel. It gave me those annoying butterflies. I glared at him as the machine beside me beeped loudly, indicating my racing heart. Caspian knew exactly what he was doing because he smirked. You're so beautiful, Lyra, he told me. Lying in the hospital bed with chapped lips, pale skin, a shaven head, a half-swollen face and a robotic arm, I felt anything but beautiful. I felt like a crumbled leaf, and the person responsible for all this was none other than me. It was the most brutal truth to accept because deep down it shook something inside me. The hatred I had for the brothers was dangerous. Too dangerous for my own good. It had almost destroyed me. I never thought about it too seriously, but when you wake up to find a cybernetic arm attached to your body and a chip in your brain, you gain a certain kind of perspective that an ordinary arm wouldn't have given you. You're lying, I sobbed. I didn't want to cry, but my eyes swelled up with tears when I felt the emptiness inside me. Not that it wasn't there before. It was just that I had been filling it with hate. Becoming aware of it made me feel pathetic. But still, it didn't change anything. I despised the brothers, especially Marius. Caspian's eyes softened and he kissed my humane hand, giving me more sparks and butterflies. The machine was beeping wildly, but no one seemed to pay attention to it. I will never lie to you, Lyra. You're beautiful, and I feel blessed to be your mate, he spoke, kissing my hand again. I wanted to pull away but didn't because it was oddly comforting. I hated that I felt that way about this exchange, but I needed more of it. It made me feel like an ant lost in a stream who had finally found a dead branch to hold on to. I could have never imagined that a king brother would make me feel this way. It made me wonder why the moon goddess had chosen them for me. 30 Marius. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus on work. Many things were waiting to be done: managing pack affairs, dealing with the officials regarding the fake money laundering cases filed by Morgan, and mainly dealing with all the mess Morgan had created for us. Despite all this work, my mind kept wandering and returning to Lyra in the hospital. I was glad that she was awake. It had been more than a month since she had been unconscious. She had to be put in a coma for a couple of weeks after critical brain surgery and getting a cybernetic arm. My mind constantly replayed the moment when she woke up and asked for water. I'd asked her if she recognized me, and I would never forget how she looked at me with disdain in her eyes. She said she hated me, which kept me awake at night. It wasn't like Caspian, and I had slept much in the past month. We had been busy looking for specialist doctors and engineers for her cybernetic arm and the swelling in her brain. I wouldn't be able to rest until she was out of hospital and living with us, healthy and happy. It was all that mattered to Caspian and me at the moment. The rest of the world could wait. I sighed heavily, staring at the screen and scrolling through the legal documents. I hadn't visited the hospital for the past few days to see Lyra. I knew she didn't want me to be there because every time I went to see her, she'd either pretend to sleep or ignore me altogether. However, she was more responsive to Caspian, which was why he spent most of the time at the hospital with her. My wolf kept pacing inside me, urging me to see her. He felt the most tortured of all. Seeing our mate hurt was agonizing in itself, and on top of that, she didn't want to do anything with me. I didn't know why she hated me so much. I kept thinking about how disappointed she looked when she saw me for the first time. It hurt deeply. I snapped out of my thoughts when the office door opened and Caspian walked in. He seemed to be in a much better state than me. He gave me a look of pity, but I ignored it. "She's awake," he told me. "You should go see her. It'd encourage her wolf to heal her faster," he urged. My wolf was ready to go, but I wasn't. Every time I went to see her, I felt unwanted and rejected. If she didn't want to see me, I didn't want to disturb her, no matter how bad my yearning for her got. "She doesn't want to see me," I told him up front, and he frowned. "She seems to hate me." Said who? That was the first thing she said when she woke up, I told him. He hadn't been there when she told me she hated me. "But you should go and see her once. It'll help you too. You look worse. Your wolf must be aching to get close to her." "I don't want to push her when she's weak," I snapped. I knew Caspian meant well, but I didn't want him to feel sorry for me. I'd pursue her when she got better, but not now. She needed to rest. Seeing me there seemed to distress her even more. Caspian sighed but didn't say anything. "She has been here for more than a month, but no one ever came looking for her," Caspian commented. "Doesn't she have anyone?" He wondered out loud. I had been thinking about the same for a while. I had tried to dig out more about her but to no avail. "Maybe she's an orphan," I muttered. "Still, she must have some friends." Caspian pressed, running his fingers through his hair. "Someone who could tell us more about her." "She's such a mystery. Didn't she tell you anything?" I asked. "Not really. She seems shocked, especially about her new arm. It'd take her a long time to process it." "I don't blame her," I muttered. I was devastated to have her left arm amputated, but it seemed to have helped her so far. "Did you ask her about the explosion?" I asked. "Not yet," he shook his head. "I don't want to distress her. She needs to heal first. The good news is the swelling in her brain has gone down, and her body hasn't rejected the new arm and the chip in her brain. Doc says she's healing well, but it's still not as fast as it should be. Her wolf is weak," Caspian informed me. A thoughtful silence fell between us before he suggested, "I'm thinking of moving her to our house so we can be close to her. Feeling us around would strengthen her wolf faster. She needs us as much as we need her." I doubted his last statement but didn't say it out loud. She only seemed to need Caspian while she acted as if I was a no one. I grunted. "What does the doc say?" I asked. "They say the same. The earlier our wolves bond, the stronger her wolf will get and heal her faster," Caspian replied, looking at me prudently. "The empty room upstairs will be best for her. She'll love it, especially the sunroom." I nodded, thinking about it. Even though Lyra didn't want to be around me, I wanted to be around her. I desperately needed to feel her presence around me and bond with her wolf. Sometimes I wondered if her wolf loathed me the same way she did. I'd be devastated if that were the case, but for now, I was willing to try for selfish reasons. I needed her achingly. I'll set up her room, I declared, getting up. It'd be a good distraction for me, and even if I couldn't see and talk to Lyra, being in the same house would still be more than enough for me. Lyra's story continues. Subscribe to us and follow her future together.